Okay, shoulders and chests. So this is where, we've been talking about a lot of differences in mammals and dinosaurs and mammals and everything else, but this is actually where mammals really part company with like possibly everything else in the universe. And it's this issue here that mammals completely separate their shoulder blades, their scapulae, away from most of the pectoral girdle. Now, in primitive mammals and some of them that, like primates, including us, we have a clavicle that's a weak connection, although it doesn't do a whole lot to constrain how much motion there is. But this is like the most you can get in a mammal to connect them, and most of them, sorry, this is a little fuzzy, but most of them don't even have that. The shoulders are totally hanging on the rib cage without any connection up front there to the chest area, the pectoral, the sternum. Let's go with that. That's the more common term. To the sternum. The sternum is still extensive. It comes up and connects to all the vertebrae since these are stomach breathers and they don't move the ribs as much. But they're just like totally unhinged from the shoulders. And as a result, the sternum actually comes up in front of it, leading to what I call mammal chestiness, where it comes through. And I think here's a good picture of this deer here, where like the chest comes through, and there's a little bit of hanging fur, but that's pretty much just like part of the body cavity that's just in front of the shoulders. And that is really incredibly strange, actually. It seems normal to us because we're mammals, and most of the big charismatic megafauna we see in zoos and on the Discovery Channel do this, but that is actually incredibly weird in the history of life on this planet. Dinosaurs actually have big coracoid bones that come right together at the midline, and then they actually have other bones, which are sort of visible there but not easy to see, which come right up and meet them. And dinosaurs, believe it or not, actually reduce the amount of connections they have up front. Birds, of course, are dinosaurs, but they go to even more trouble to like fuse up the underneath and connect it to the shoulder blades and develop giant wishbones that further reinforce it. But looking at primitive animals like lizards, you can see, doesn't it look like a wishbone? It's not, but it looks functionally the same. They totally tie their chests together. And that actually is the primitive solution. Here, for example, is a wonderful, recently made available 3D scan of Ichthya stega. This is an animal that's one of the first animals with backbones and really arms and legs. And you can see the legs are still more like fins in some ways, but they could push themselves up at least a little bit. And look how massive this whole region is down here. If you look at it on the underside, see how it's completely bound together? That's so that whatever force is generated here still gets passed up to the body, even though the scapulae don't attach with a bony connection to the body the way the hips do. So this like primitive, let's get everything bound together up front is normal, and that means that in life sculpting or drawing, usually the shoulder muscles, and this is some of the shoulder muscles here, the deltoids, and then the pectoral muscles come to here, and on this side, this would be the deltoid here again, and pectoral muscles coming down. They largely come right to the center of the animal, and the heart and other bits don't start until after all of that. You will get all the skeleton images for the person asked. That's a promise. You'll actually get extra ones for a bit more variety. Okay, even non-mammals that you'd be like looking at them, they can't possibly have their shoulders come together at their chest like this ridiculously rotund walking table-like armored dinosaur. The head is unfortunately over it because the jerk artist who drew this sorry, had the head covered, but they actually come not only close together, they actually touch, and in some of these guys they actually fuse to each other. That's how little motion they're allowing between these bones, and then of course contacting the other parts of the sternum coming down. So what does this mean? Well, if I may add a bit of humor, think of it this way. This is a blue-footed booby. If any of you are chuckling to yourselves when you said this, know that only mammals would find that funny, because really only in mammals would we put such an emphasis on the chest? Usually in everything else, you have an emphasis on other parts of the body for decoration. And so any other species throughout time that was intelligent, when you say blue-footed booby, you'd be like, haha, it has blue feet, not what some of you may have been possibly thinking. Now, that's not to say that mammal shoulders being weird are bad. They are highly mobile. This, of course, would be an example from a person. If you've ever seen a young person, which have very mobile shoulders and are often quite thin, it can almost look grotesque if you're not ready for it to see just how far back their shoulders can kind of move off the rib cage. But this is really useful for running four-legged mammals because that shoulder blade acts as a whole nother limb segment, and it rotates through a quite extensive arc with the leg. So the leg isn't just the humerus and the forearm bones and the hand bones. It's also the shoulder blade. Now, in non-mammals, there's a lot less shoulder motion, but that's not the same thing as saying there's no motion. Here, I'm going to skip around just a sec. In these guys, no shoulder motion pretty much at all, totally locked together. But working on crocs, which have relatively locked together pectoral girdles but aren't quite as locked up as Ichthyostega there, they've now done moving X-ray videos that they then fitted bones over, and it's very clear in both the X-ray video and the 3D reconstructions that the scapula, the shoulder, does move in a walking crocodile. And it would have undoubtedly also moved in four-legged dinosaurs for the same reason. However, I think it's important to note that because of the fact that they are slightly bound together and they have to kind of slide with the sternum down here, they probably moved a little bit differently. Mammals tend to have the point of rotation sort of right up at the top, and I'm thinking much like crocodiles, dinosaurs might have had the point of rotation a little lower in the scapula, in the shoulder blade. But this is really important. So this is a big four-legged plant-eating dinosaur, very, very stiff back, but relatively short neck, just a tip of my hat to earlier in the talk. But if I were to cover up the shoulder, look at how ludicrously short the forearms are compared to the hind limbs. But if you get to add the shoulder blade on as an extra motion or limb segment, all of a sudden the height of the forelimbs as they can rotate and the height of the hind limbs are almost the same. And in most four-legged dinosaurs, whether the big long-necked sauropods or horned dinosaurs or even some other members of the duck-billed dinosaur group, you'll notice an odd coincidence in properly reconstructed skeletons. The length from the top of the leg or right there where it moves to the ground and to the close to the top of the scapula to the ground is almost always within 5%. And that is not a coincidence. So when designing animals, do not neglect how important the shoulder is and where it is on the animal as an extra segment of the leg, which helps the forelimb move. Now that, of course, is assuming that the scapula is on the sides, which is the normal position. But in some animals, like birds and bird-like dinosaurs and like primates and people, the scapula, of course, moves way up to the back, and that has a dramatic effect on range. You get a lot more arm range in kind of a 3D coming out of the apparatus sense. But you also get arms that are not nearly as well placed for ground-based locomotion. So animals like that tend to be waving their arms around, maybe climbing trees or what have you, but they tend not to be running quickly around on all fours. Back to Ichthyostega, who's not moving quickly at all for any reason. And in fact, these guys probably are pretty much spending their whole lives in water, if any of you are sort of interested in a side paleo trip. Instead, these guys are probably, you could think of them as sort of seals in shallow water is probably the best model, except rather than being seals on a beach at the ocean, they're like seals in mucky, shallow swamp water areas. By the way, if anyone wants a really cool sculpting project, I'm just saying, it'd be really cool. Okay, so let's summarize a bit about chest and shoulders before we do a quick limb preview. Mammal chestiness is weird. It's weird, 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 strange, weird. If you're designing a mammal-like alien or creature, definitely do it because, again, it's a surefire way to scream mammal at the audience. If you're trying not to design a mammal-like animal, please don't. Nothing else has done it in the history of our planet, and honestly, I suspect it's a weird solution altogether. I think if you could somehow rewind and replay the history of the Earth like 10 times, you might only see like the weird, totally separated, free-floating shoulders on the side of the ribcage. Thing happen like once or twice. It's got to be odd. It only happens the one time here in land animals. Okay. Otherwise, by and large, animals have their shoulders at least partially connected to the pectoral girdle, the sternum area. And of course, even some mammals do, including us. But we have really small, weak connections, whereas most of them have a more robust connection that kind of helps constrain exactly how the shoulder can move. It doesn't mean they can't move. It just kind of constrains them. But that said, mammal-like shoulder blades are very good for moving. So if you're designing a tree climbing animal that's going to like really use the upper hands to climb around, you might want to invoke this, even if you aren't doing a mammal. Although in that case, you're going to want the shoulder blades up on the top of the rib cage rather than on the sides. Or in other words, as cool as this animal was in the movie, it was clearly a mammal-like set of shoulders and chests. And then they went ahead and put a second set of mammal-like shoulders on there, which you can see why they did. It was really easy to design that way. But if you're designing aliens for alien worlds, use extreme caution. Do it if you feel it's a good design, but don't do it simply because you don't know better. Okay. I will only briefly stop for questions here because I do want to get to the quick limb preview so I can also hand it off to Ryan. And I can take questions when I finish that. But if there's any really important question related to chests or shoulders, now would be a good time. I will take that as a either don't have the question or it's really, really long and I'm typing a paragraph. So I'm going to move on until I see the paragraph show up. Okay, limbs. Next week we're going to go a lot more into limbs, and we also covered them a bit last week, so I just kind of want to reinforce that for those of you who are starting on projects this week that are like, you need to have legs too, obviously. And the key I want to talk about really, for now, I'll talk about mammal and dinosaur like ankles and knees and wrists next week, but I do want to rehash the whole flex limb versus graviportal or elephant limb thing. There really is no connection between whether you have permanently flexed knees, like these dinosaurs and mammals do here, and their weight. People, for example, don't weigh a whole lot, but we have very straight knees and we walk on our feet. We'll talk about that more next week too. These are quite big animals. You wouldn't want them stepping on your toes, and Triceratops, a relative of this guy who gets up to the size of an elephant, has the exact same hind limbs. These are big animals, but they have flexed knees, and they're active animals. They can run or at least really haul. They also tend to walk on their toes more rather than their feet. Notice how the blue part of us is totally on the ground, and the yellow part's like just there for adjusting our balance a little bit. Animals with flexed limbs, not always, but more often than not, tend to walk on the toes and get that extra foot segment up off the ground so the ankles are up high, and that actually gives them another set of springs, if you will, another set of flex parts in the limb to really help extend the limb and make it move faster. Animals with long, straight, not permanently flexed knees, whether people, elephants, this is not actually an elephant, this is a mammoth, or this long-necked sauropod dinosaur, tend to do it not so much because of weight, but because of efficiency. And I discussed this last week, and I'll have a few pictures next week to really drive it home. But this allows you to just barely pick the foot up and swing it forward like a pendulum and land. It's cheap. That's why you do it. It's not because it supports the weight better. It probably does to a very slight degree. It's not because of that, because they tend to reduce the size of the bones quite a bit relative to flex-limbed animals. It's mostly because walking is cheaper. And if you don't have to run, it's really nice to be able to walk as cheaply as possible. Whereas if you run, and here's here, Here's a bird done animated using one of those videos that I told you about. Notice how the knee is flexed all the time, and notice how high the ankle has to come and how much even the knee, although they don't flex as much in birds, have to flex to get everything cleared. It's more expensive to lift all that tissue up and rotate those bones using those muscles every time. Replay. Good. But it lets you be more active. Now, of course, this is like a guinea fowl or something. Really small flex-limbed animals. You have really big flex-limbed animals. What they all have in common is they're sacrificing walking efficiency for their ability to speed up and be more active as they go. So don't do this. This is bad to your animals that are supposed to be active. Also, if you're doing a theropod, don't do that. Allosaurs can't do that. Well, they can't do it more than once. Some other things. This is that knees out, ankles in that Ryan brought up. If you look at a meat-eating dinosaur pelvis, this would be from the front. This is actually from Greg Paul. I actually have another one somewhere I did a while ago. I'll find it, leave it as a reference for you guys. You'll notice that usually the knees come out and the legs come in. This kind of stuff really doesn't happen in large, upright, active animals a whole lot. These tend to be smaller animals. They can be active, but they don't have the same weight constraints. Whereas this kind of situation is really going to be your sauropods and your elephants. I will say that even them, did I put it in there? They tend to have the limbs canted inward a bit more than this like superficial drawing of like it's straight-legged here. The other thing is elbows tend to follow the same rule as knees. In most animals, even upright animals, the elbows come out from the shoulder and then the wrists are in. Now, in this picture, it's kind of hidden because, of course, they have these giant shoulder muscles and they have such wide torsos. But even still, the elbows are definitely out further than the wrists are. And I think this is important. When a rhino runs, and rhinos can gallop, if not terribly fast, they actually stick the elbows out even more relative to the wrists. And this is probably true from almost all flex-limbed animals that weigh a lot, is that they can increase that degree of flexion as they move faster in both the knees and the elbows. I don't mean that they end up looking like crocodiles necessarily, but there is a relationship to how flexed your limbs are and the speed you're going right now. And that's true even of straight-limbed animals like humans. If you walk, obviously your knees bend more than when you're standing still, but when you run, your knees are even more flexed than when you're walking, even though we can straighten them out. So this is like a common theme for all animals that can run. Here's a bird picture. Now, birds, of course, this is a giant flightless bird called a mihirong. It's extinct, but here's a nice drawing as if somebody had plucked it and had it ready to be cooked in the largest pressure cooker of all time. This is an animal that will weigh like half a ton. Even though birds have largely shrunk up their femur, here's the knee, believe it or not, way up here. You can still see that from here is where the upper part of the femur would be in front view to out there where the knee is and then back into the ankles. So even a real giant, stout-looking, terror bird, although these aren't truly terror birds, but birds that would be horrible to step on your feet, you still have the exact same thing happening as you do in animals like T-Rex or Velociraptor. And so probably if you're designing anything that's supposed to be related at all to animals on Earth, like follow the same design principles, probably you want to usually have your knees out and your ankles in on any flex-limbed animal, and on the front end you always want to have your elbows out a little bit and your wrists in. Okay, so this is just obviously the briefest of possible limb overviews. I just want to touch upon some issues of elephantine versus flex-limbedness. We'll cover them in some more depth before we get to the nitty-gritty next week. But as a general concept, if you are designing an animal, if you want to think about how active it's supposed to be. Not all animals have to be running straight through standing trees to chase down their prey. Some of them only have to be big. Some of them can just move fast by walking fast like an elephant to be scary enough. Or maybe it just has to be filler, in which case maybe you want to design a big animal that isn't so overly active. But you want to think about, as you're putting your design together, what of these conditions you want it to be or what it needs to be. If you're working on a script, it may say you have to do it mihirong, M-I-H A-R-H-U-N-G? I think I left a letter out in there. Sorry, I'd have to probably look that up offhand. So, and this is key, despite the fact that, once again, you'll find it all over the internet, elephant/sauropod/human knees that can be straightened out all the way are there because it's efficient to move and because they don't necessarily need to run as effectively or at all in the case of big animals like that. It's not because just because you're big you have to support your weight. It's definitely a myth. We know it's not true because smaller, lighter animals sometimes straighten their legs out to get that walking efficiency, and really giant animals in the past have sometimes retained those flex-limbed knees and ankles. So it's related to activity level. It's not related to just being big. Okay, so this is the end of the me blabbing at you part. Here are also some nice examples of the legs coming together. The rhino here doesn't have the knees out quite as far. When they run, they get out a little further, but I will point out that there's a ton of muscle here, which is misleading. The actual pelvis is not quite that wide, so you still have essentially vertical upper leg bones and then canted in ankles. So it is still following the same pattern, but not nearly as much as you would see in a horse or even a triceratops, just so you know. When you're looking at solid animals and not the bones, it can be kind of confusing. The elephant, on the other hand, actually has a slightly broader pelvis, and the femur actually does slope inward, as well as the ankles being upward graviportal column-limbed animals. Otherwise, this is essentially, like I said, the finish of the lecture. I did want to point out that, especially for those of you who aren't doing ZBrush, you can totally be applying these things in a 2D sketch, especially if you want to hold off starting a full physical sculpture until you get a little bit more under your belt, or else just start working on it as a full physical sculpture. All these things will apply right now, and they apply just as well. I will say that I'm going to put up a lot of my own muscle diagrams and my own skeletal reconstructions into the set. I'm doing that because since you're in this class, I fully encourage you, if you want to work in 2D, even if you want to work in 2D, just to create a backward projection to model in ZBrush or as a guide for a 3D sculpture, please feel free to take the images we put up later this week and just hack them up in Photoshop or GIMP or wherever you use if you want. Obviously, this is for an educational experience. If you want to post it later and be like, look at this cool composite creature I made, that'll be fine. Just kind of reference where you got it from. But otherwise, really feel free to go ahead and take those skeletal drawings, take the skeletal and muscles, and hack them around if you want right there, and then maybe draw over them later or something. It'll help you start applying the concepts, to start literally mixing and matching in a way that's more literal than you would maybe if you're designing a creature, to be like, hey, well, what happens if I take these bones here and shove them on over there? So you have my full permission to do that. Normally, I don't otherwise give anyone permission to hack up all my stuff, but I really think it's a valuable way to learn if some of you want to work or are comfortable working in 2D. So if you feel free to use them, for a tracing or photo manipulation montage to kind of help you develop ideas before translating to your own drawings or sculptures or what have you. I'll certainly take any questions. I think there are a couple here, and then otherwise, Ryan, it's probably your show if you want to apply some of this in ZBrush, or at least talk about how people might move into applying this rapidly.
Yeah, real quick question though. Would you know what your screen resolution is?
1280 by 800, because it was from there down to 800 by 600.
Okay, so we'll see. It'll probably just increase with this. So, all right. Should I switch over to my screen?
I think that's fine. I can answer questions, I think, without any I'll try to talk over you, but I'll just answer, whatever questions there are.
Oh, yeah, please, no, I'll wait for you. I'll just switch it to my screen.
Okay. Oh, someone asked about backward legs. Okay, yeah, this is a good one to go back to. Hold on. Yeah, the backward knees issue. I don't have the theropod one in here. I want to kick out of this and open up another presentation real fast. Let's see here. Actually, I think I have it as an old blog picture. Ooh, it's more challenging to navigate Windows when you have a bunch of VR stuff up on your desk. Here's the short version. I did a blog post a while back not because I'm upset with you guys, it's a common misconception. The reason for the big red letters is because somebody on Scientific American actually published that bird knees bend backwards. So here we go. This is a extinct bird. The reason it looks like they bend backwards is because they've shortened the upper leg bone, the femur, and therefore raised the knee all the way up until it's hidden by their bodies. And because they have wings, they're often literally hidden from view. So the knee is way up here on birds. This is the ankle. It's equivalent to this part down here. Of course, in dogs, you can see both. So here's the knee, bending the normal way, just like in a bird or a person. And then they are walking their toes, so they have the high ankle, just not as high as birds do. So that's a really good question. Definitely a misconception that a lot of people have, that it'll really help you with your designs to understand. All animals have their joints faced the same way. There are some bat pictures you'll see. Bats have very mobile hip sockets, so they can actually flex their legs so far out that when they're hanging upside down, it looks like all their joints are backwards, but they've actually simply rotated their legs around most of the way relative to how they're hanging. They're not actually bending the wrong way still. All animals have their joints go the same way, and probably it's impossible for them to go another way, but we'll talk about that more when we get to hexapods. Yeah, please do. I'm going to give you more skeletons. Somebody just said they want to practice the color coding. I'll give you lots of skeletons without the color coding. Totally feel free to marker it up, Photoshop it up, whatever, with those if that helps. Oh, somebody's, okay, haha. Yeah, that's another great question. Okay, let me hop back into the class. By the way, great questions. As an instructor, I just want to thank you. I love it when people ask you questions because A, it means you're actually listening, but B, it helps me see parts that I can help emphasize to make sure the understanding is there, not just the, well, he said so. Okay, so, oops, which one had the calcaneum blue? Did I do it in the bird picture that I was just showing you? I will say that for the ones you're going to get here that I talked about in the class today, I took a specific convention that I'll be doing throughout the class. And if you look at it, animals primitively have two sets of ankle bones, proximal and distal ones, if you will. The ones, let's say, that are closest to the actual leg bones and the ones that are closest to the actual foot bones. The same thing happens in the arm. There's primitively, all groups of animals have rows of wrist bones closer to the lower arm and then closer to the hand bones. With two rows, obviously, you have to have one that way. The reason I divided these is that lots of animals develop joints or hinges in between those sets of ankle bones. And when they do something else, like in the case of deer, which have an extra hinge here, I wanted to be really obvious that that is different and weird. So I have separated the close to and far away wrist and ankle bones in all of the colored skeletons you'll be getting to help you get that one part normally goes more with the upper bones and the other part normally goes more with the lower bones in terms of motion. Let's see, dinosaurs in front view do not have clavicles. Well, they have clavicles. They're fused together into a furcula. That is the wishbone like you see in birds. That wishbone you break, those are really fancy clavicles that have been fused together at the midpoint and do a lot of other fancy stuff now. There's a good question about comparative musculature. There was in the 10-week class. How can I answer this in a good way? There's definitely going to be several references to comparative musculature, but I'm not going to have time to do an entire color-coded muscle system for you of different animals at this time. That would be a wonderful thing. I hope to do something like that in the future. Perhaps they could even go up my website or something. Or if we ever do an expanded course later or something. But there isn't going to be a set of those as handouts for this class, I'm afraid, right now. Let's see. I think there was another question. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I'm good. Did you get the clavicle question?
Yeah, those are the furcula or fancy clavicles stuck together, fused into one. Oh, somebody asked about how much fusion is possible in bones in general. You know, bones fuse all the time. Even in animals that don't normally have fused bones, of course, like people can have fused vertebrae. Now, normally we have doctors do it, but if you injure your vertebrae, they can actually fuse together on their own. And tons of groups of animals fuse bones together. If you look at the pelvis here, every one of those used to be, if you go back far enough down the dinosaur line, used to be separate vertebrae that are fused into one long synsternum there, or synsacrum there. And in some groups, like pterosaurs, they actually fuse some of the bones up in the shoulders into a similar sort of structure up there. So yeah, bones can fuse together lots of places. A good example, actually, is you won't see a tibia on a lot of hoofed mammals, and that's because it's largely disappeared and what's left has fused onto them, or a lot of fibulae rather, the extra bone that you'll see in most animals, because it either shrinks or fuses onto both many hoofed mammals and also birds. And there are some other dinosaur groups where it happens as well. So lots and lots of fusion is possible when you're designing an animal, and you should not be afraid of that. Usually fusion happens either to strengthen something, or it happens to reduce weight in the limbs. Good question about turtles. Their spines actually fuse to the shells in some cases, but not in all. But they're always well attached to the shell. They don't necessarily all fuse together. It kind of depends on the turtle you're looking at. It's a good question, though. Okay. The question about the Alien movie and reversed legs. Yes. When you get to aliens that are more like, actually, I think the Alien movie might actually just have the high ankle rather than the reversed leg. I'm going to have to go back and look at that. However, when you're designing an alien that has arachnid features, that is not a problem. But that said, I actually have a strong hunch that I've seen it, and I think actually it was designed more of a bird or theropod system where the femur was just really short and the ankle bones were really long. If I'm wrong, though, it would still be fine because they're purposely making it insect-like, which would allow you to do at least some different things. We'll, when we get to hexapods and when we get to week 5, we'll talk more about what you can do with different kinds of limb joints. Okay, I think then we're good. Ryan, I'll hand it over to you.